Just got done watching the Gen Con 2023 Paizo Remaster panel, and it was pretty much a lot of what we were hoping for. We got to see a bunch of new things, new character sheets, tons of new images, and full spreads of the pages coming from the player core and the GM core. So rather than talk about it, how about we just start kind of reviewing it? So my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So once again, this will be another summary. The panel was maybe a little bit over an hour long. I'll try to summarize it as quickly as I can, but I'm going to be referring to my notes over here. So if you see me looking over there, although you won't see a lot of me because I'm going to be showing you a lot of page spreads. But anyways, we opened up with Jason Bullman as well as Michael Sayer and James Case were on the panel. So the last time that they kind of had a panel about this, they were still working on the book, but they are largely done. So we're going to be seeing pages and pages from Player Core and GM Core. And we basically went into what they are. The Player Core has everything needed to play Pathfinder. It's going to come out in November. And the GM Core, it basically has everything that a GM is going to need compacted into one particular book. It used to be spread across the old handbook as well as the Game Mastery Guide. Now it's all combined and makes a lot more sense. It is basically a lot of hindsight, and they know how people were using the books and how people were playing the game. So now they can go ahead and combine those and make it a little bit better. So the standard edition, the special edition, as well as the retailer exclusive sketch covers are coming out in November of this year. And in February, the pocket editions will be coming out. So they talked about initially how they remastered these books. So the first spread we're going to show is from the core rulebook playing the game. You can see that the text is pretty dense. The navigation on the side is pretty basic. It just tells you kind of generally where you are in the book, but nothing specific. And information is broken up over various pages. So you kind of have to flip around in order to find the information that you want. Now, the second spread, the side navigation is better, but it has the same information. Navigation on the right is much more complex with better info on where you are in the chapter. There's more space just in general on the page. The headers are bolder and cleaner, and it is grouped by spread and better navigation. So in a macro sense, they've basically just tried to remix and remaster things in order to try to make it better. And you're going to hear those a lot, those two words a lot. So what's in these books? In the Player Core is 466 pages, a lot of material. In the beginning is an introduction that explains the game example play and character creation. And then we get into the ancestry and class breakdown that is in this book. And that is for ancestries, dwarf, elf, gnome, goblin, halfling, human, leshy, orc, and versatile heritages with the changeling, the Nephilim, and mixed ancestry. And then the classes are bard, cleric, druid, fighter, ranger, rogue, witch, and wizard. Now the ancestries, they added some more material. Leshies were added. They were in the Lost Omens character guide previously, but they are iconic nature spirits. So there are 8 heritages in the Leshies with a full write-up to include cactus, fruit, fungus, gourd, leaf, lotus, root, and seaweed. And the other thing they wanted to do is they wanted to fix something they saw kind of as an oversight maybe, is that half-elf and half-elf mixed heritage were in the original handbook, but half-orc was there, but the full orc wasn't. So in order to be a little bit cheeky, and because of the orc license, they included orc in the new player core. Some changes and mixes, they basically brushed them up a little bit. Originally, they came after half-orcs in the book, but it's now all located in one place. They brushed up a few feats and took a feat that was not satisfying. They didn't specifically say, but was not satisfying, made it a little lower level and spicier. Now, you aren't losing anything by playing this version of orc, but it should be more satisfying. So now with the benefit of hindsight and how people are playing the game, they can now move stuff around to make more sense, and they're trying to put all the information in one place. Then we moved on to the Nephilim, unifying a bunch of similar concepts that each had their own different explanation, and it gave some opportunities. With all these various types of versatile heritages, but it could also be a bit limiting. So at their core, versatile heritages that mix your ancestry with a creature from beyond the realms of the universe. And they did kind of clarify the pronunciation of what it should be. So it should be Nephilim. Pre-remaster versatile heritages were Aasimar, which were celestials, and the Tieflings, which were fiendish, but they both had a lot of overlap. They had similar feats for dark vision and wings, and sometimes they didn't have the same feat, but they should have. And they brought up an example of if you wanted something specific, like the Azadas, who are wild and chaotic celestial beings who often have the features of animals like foxes or snakes. But only the bucket for fiends had the options to give your character a snake tail or fox teeth. Now we get into Nephilim feats. Keeps a lot of the fun, strong elements that they already had with the lineages. Talking about the options like the Lawbringer were influenced by the Archons, who were militant celestial beings, and Pitborn, where you would have the dark powers of the Outer Rifts. They let the lineages serve as a stronger branching point. One of these beings from the outer planes have influenced your bloodline and have given you certain abilities. For example, dark vision or resistances. And you can either dial in very tightly to a specific type if you want. And the example they brought up was Muse Touch, that have a halo and a tail. Or you can just kind of do more and not be so focused in. But either way, you can put it all together with this versatile heritage. The other thing is what if you wanted a character that's a little bit different? What if you wanted it demonic or angelic or a devilish ancestry, but you wanted to combine those things and use it as a representation of the war of good versus evil, holy versus unholy, and have hooves and brimstone, but also have a halo and have people find you trustworthy? Before, the tracks did not connect to allow you to do that, but now they do. Not just add them together, but you get a multiplicative benefit for character creation and roleplay opportunities, and now you can tell more stories. They are very excited that the versatile heritages are being in the core, so you can take it and run with it, as they were not there in the first year of publication of the original second edition handbook. So now they can be just as key to your character as any other ancestry could be. And the ongoing theme is this is a remix. And they wanted to kind of do what is the most popular and what is used the most. So backgrounds, there were not a lot of changes, so we really didn't spend any time on that at all. But classes, there are 8 classes, and they each had various levels of change. The fighter did not see vast changes, but others saw a bunch. And so we kind of moved over to James' case a little bit about classes, but the 8 classes were picked for a variety of reasons. Basic concepts, they wanted one caster of every magic tradition, and they wanted to group Leshy and Druid together as they have similar themes. Fighter is not a class they change very much, mainly quality of life improvements. Fighters get a lot of feats that were expanded in the advanced player guide and expanded upon, but they wanted to put it together in one kind of arc. So they looked at rules that were not necessary, modifying and retooling these things. And one thing they saw was with the open trait, it did need to be the first move of your turn, but it didn't necessarily need to do that. And the example they brought up was sudden charge. It needed to be at the start, but some people may want to strike a creature and then sudden charge somewhere else. You couldn't do that before. Also mentioned changing flat-footed to off guard. And then we kind of went into a couple other classes, and we covered 3, and that would be Cleric, Witch, and Wizard, and we'll start with a Cleric. The big change is a removal of the 9-grid alignment for Cleric. It was a bit of a clunky tool for stories as well as the OGL, and they wanted a more granular way. But this is a classic fantasy game with classic good versus evil, so now we have a sanctification mechanic that you'll see throughout all the classes, but mainly Cleric. So they kind of brought up some key terms for sanctification, and it's in the sidebar on this image, but sanctification is the holy or unholy trait that you can be aligned with to kind of put you on one side of the cosmic fight. Clerics are devoted to their deity and can get divine sanctification. Some deities are more sticklers, while some prefer and or might not have a requirement, while some might want you to remain totally neutral. Iomedae is very law and order. Sarenrae allows you to be holy, but you don't have to. Aurori is the personal pursuit of perfection. It gives you the option to sanctify holy or unholy, or decide not to do it at all, but whatever you're going to do, you need to be perfect at it. Asmodeus requires unholy, and is generally driven by the story of the deity. One of the coolest things is it's not just a trait, but it can improve your abilities. Many cleric abilities will have sanctification on it, and it allows you to add the trait and make it much stronger against the opposing trait. Divine castigation is one example they brought up. If you were holy, it would be stronger against unholy creatures and vice versa. They also made similar updates, not just based on alignment. And one of the big things that I think is fantastic is your heal font or your harm font is no longer charisma based, which is amazing for character creation. They just decided, what if we just gave the 4 extra heal or harm now and not make them use charisma for the divine font? So now you can kind of redistribute those points into other things. Another thing they had was big changes to War Priest. It improved weapons proficiency and armor proficiency to scale better and higher up to expert. Players were already doing these things to the War Priest as kind of a hack, so they would have to take a Sentinel or a Champion archetype in order to try to get these higher. So they added a second level feat that is tailored so that these archetypes were not a requirement. Since you don't have to go Charisma and go Strength and Constitution, you can now be tankier. And if you want to play more in the front lines, go ahead while staying in the base Cleric chassis. And you now have Sanctification, so some of these War Priest feats have gotten brush ups or adds that allow you to do more with them later on. Also brought up that the Cloistered Cleric did get some fun tools. Nothing that was a major change, but once again, the fonts are not based on charisma anymore, so that's a big change. But the play experience and character creation is smoother and more rewarding. Then we move into Witch. It's one class from the Advanced Player's Guide, got moved into the core because of how iconic it is and popular it is to play, but it was clunky to build and hard to get the flavor of that traditional Witch. So it had the greatest degree of changes, tune-up, and corrections. One of the biggest was patrons, and we have a list of all the patrons, and it's largely mapped to the Advanced Player's Guide, but they have been tuned up in 2 ways. First of all, there's more of a role-playing hook and how to play it. They are basically an alias for an entity. For example, a cursed theme patron is now the Resentment. And 2, there was a popular variant to know a bit more about your patron, but now it is kind of there in the text. They knew they wanted to give the Witch new toys. It's the premier familiar caster, but others could be better with certain archetypes. So each patron now gives one familiar ability that kind of breaks the rules, but does not cost your familiar budget. And a good thing they talked about here was when you cast or sustain a hex, it will be able to do something special. And a good example of this was Silence in the Snow freezes the ground around the familiar to make it difficult terrain. Now, the familiar always had some tools that other familiars could not get a hold of. They wanted to make sure that the familiar always has some tools that other familiars that aren't witch classes just can't get a hold of. Then they went into witches' feats. There's a bunch of new ones. They took feats that had a strong witchy flavor and made them so that they can have some powerful effects and flavor as well. One of the examples they brought up was the ceremonial knife, and it basically is a knife that you can prepare and can use it as a wand for the rest of the day. And then they brought up Eldritch Nails and Living Hair were combined to witch armaments, which is something that you can now take at level 1. And they talked about another one that if a strike hits, it makes it easier for your hexes to land. And it's a good way to set up combos and these hex cantrips that set up favorable debuffs and conditions. Now, specific abilities for familiars to make them more present in the fight. One example they brought up was Shed Spirit, which lets your familiar spirit leave its body to do spirit damage and bring back that damage so that you can heal an ally. And they wanted to make sure that it felt like the familiar is the patron keeping an eye on you and is present in the fight as well. And then we got into the wizard, and one of the big things was the changes in the way schools work. And the big change is they stepped away from this 8-school spell system, but they needed another way to frame the schools. So in the remaster, wizards now have an arcane schools like curriculums. Each one gives a theory of the actual school's learning and things that they do. The example was School of Battle Magic. It's not just combat, but it also included things like Mist and Earthbind and Energy Aegis and things that can assist in a battle but aren't necessarily damage. It also kind of gives you where in the setting and world these arcane schools might be set. And remixing, it takes the themes of the schools as they did exist, but puts them together in a better and more cohesive, coherent way. So not only does it let it link to the world more strongly, but they can expand the schools and keep adding them as they make sense. And James brought up one of these things that he wants to do, which is a goblin school of pyromancy, which would be fire spells, spells about dogs, horses, and pickling. And you now have the ability to make thematic schools that do exactly that. One of the other favorites was the School of the Protean Form, which is taking place in the mind, not the body, and how you now can connect the body to the mind This would basically be biological modifications, such as like cursed metamorphosis and enlarge. So every part of this book has been touched. Then we went into skills a little bit. So showed the athletic skill, how they have a new skill activity called reposition that is part of the core athletic skill to move a character in space, as well as some changes to long jump. And we moved into feats, which is mostly the same, added a few things and changed a few things here and there. But they did bring up one of the ones that was new was the pet feat, which is a non-combat animal companion. It scales with you, it goes with you, and is hardy enough not to die, but to just be that loyal companion. Then we went into the equipment. The gear is mostly the same, but they did add assistive items into the core. And one thing is they changed the use of formulas. When it comes time to craft, if you have the formula, it reduces the setup times. And for common items, it can be reduced down to 1 day. Then the last chapter from the player core you went in is spells. And we kind of have 2 spreads from this. First one they wanted to highlight on this first spread was Cleanse Affliction. It's a big one. Clerics had all these conditional removal type spells, but they were very specific, and you had to kind of predict which one you'd need for the day based on where you were and a whole bunch of other things. Cleanse Affliction now dedicates spell slots to remove some major things without wasting your time. It condensed a few spells into one stronger staple spell. You were dedicating a spot and setting that spot aside, so they now combine it so you can do more things with just that one spot. And you don't have to try to predict whether you're going to be dealing with venom today or a toxin or a poison. Now you can remove them all with one spell. And another one they brought up was Clear Mind, which knocks out conditions in the same type way. Then in the second page, they talked about how they tried to improve runic body and runic weapon. It did allow you to attack with a +1 striking type weapon, but it brought them together and decided to allow them to scale so that they continue to be useful rather than be just something you use only in the beginning stages of your character's exploration career. And then one last thing they brought up was this new character sheet, and I'm super excited for this. They seemed super excited for this as well. You now have icons to draw the eye to what you need to see a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to keep track of what's going on, and it is more printer friendly. From there, we moved on to the GM core, and they brought up the GM core table of contents, and we can kind of get a look at what's in the GM core now and what's not there as well. And basically, it's an essential book that you need to have on hand if you're a GM. They did a lot of reorganizing and moved a lot of stuff out of the core rule book and combined it with stuff in the game mastery guide to dial it in a little bit more tightly. One thing they did say is not everything in the game mastery guide made it into GM core, but it is really what is needed in order to GM, and it's what needs to be there. So the next thing is they kind of showed us another spread here, and they wanted to highlight that the pages are not as busy. There is a lot more clean space and nicer to look at, and it is the fundamentals of wanting to be a GM and what to do. Much of the content should look familiar, but it should hit the eye a little bit more easily. If you notice, the sidebar is more robust and more detailed, so not only do you know kind of the chapter you're in, you know where you are in that particular chapter. And it's not just the essentials. They wanted to make sure you had the tools you need to make the game your own. So they brought up some variant rules and Return of the fan favorite free archetype, as well as level 0 characters and proficiency without level. These variant rules empower you to play them how you want to play them and how you want to play your game. So proficiency without level allows you to flatten the game math-wise. It brings kind of everything closer together so you can play lower level characters against higher level monsters, or the other way around, higher level monsters against lower level characters. And they also brought up something that I thought was interesting where you can kind of use level 0 characters, not necessarily even just at the beginning, but they can be used as a flashback to already established characters as a narrative tool. There is nothing really new in the variant rules. Then we moved on to the building creatures spread. Building creatures is a core feature of the game, and they made it as easy as possible to build and modify, as well as explain why the monsters that are in the book are built that way. It's pretty critical content, and creatures are one of the most iconic things that people interact with, and it allows you the rules to modify creatures right at your fingertips. Then we kind of got into a Lost Omens setting, which is basically the campaign setting. It is the world where the rules are set if you want to use it. They are fun and exciting locations, But if you want to create your own, these are great jumping off points or ways that maybe you can assist in creating your own worlds. Then we got into a subsystem section, which are the ways you can adjust how you play your game. It had an image here of an air battle on the same page of how you might decide to use subsystems, where you would find the tools. First one is going to be the victory point subsystem, which is the fundamental skill challenge subsystem, and basically what a lot of these subsystems are based off of: how to assess success, how to assess failure, and all the ground in between. But with these subsystems, they could go into this particular section with a knowledge of how people were actually playing. So they fiddled with the math in the chase subsystem. They added new information to the research subsystem. Now they can make changes and share some of the additional guidelines. There are no new subsystems, but they have been polished up. They brought back up the chase subsystem in particular, as they really wanted to retool the math because there were unfortunate experiences when one character had to stand aside as they just were not helping. This new kind of touch up encourages everyone to be part of the chase if you are not skilled in certain things, and also some changes to the research subsystem. Then we got into the magic item section. There are a lot of magic items. Originally appeared in the core rulebook, but they were not targeted at the player. They were moved to the GM core, and it is generally the GM who decides what to use and when to use them, and to make the decision on those type of things. Kind of brought up, the flying broomstick, and wanted to point out how this had a lot of inspiration from Treasure Vault, and how Treasure Vault presented those with flavor, story, and information. Michael and Jason did a bit of the work there in this particular section. Jason mentioned that he worked on Talisman, but he had already talked about Talisman in a prior panel. But a lot of these magic items are remixes. Some have been left behind, and new stuff have been added to take their place in the whole magic item pantheon. And there's a lot of stuff sprinkled throughout with a lot of the new items. One of the things they really wanted to highlight is the old book is not invalidated. You can still continue to use the old books. You can and should use the old stuff if you want to. They just wanted to allow the rules to continue to grow. So if you have something from the old version that does not appear in the new version, use it. You can mix and match the versions. Then we got into some actual true full-on spoilers, which March 2024, they showed a bunch of art from the Monster Core, a Bogwid, which is from first edition, a dragon turtle, a halfling fighter, and a homunculus. And then we saw the cover sketch art for Monster Core. It's an adamantine dragon who is kind of striking at trolls and fleeing fungus leshies. It's a great sketch. This is going to be coming out in March of 2024. And next year, also in 2024, Player Core 2 is coming. And we kind of went over the classes that are going to be in that, which are the Alchemist, Barbarian, Champion, Investigator, Monk, Oracle, Sorcerer, and Swashbuckler. A whole bunch of new ancestries: Catfolk, Gnoll, Hobgoblin, Kobold, Lizardfolk, Ratfolk, Tengu, and the new one, which is a Tripkey, which is a frog people. And that's where we had the end of the panel. Thanked the panelists and thanked everybody for watching. And I do want to say it was a very fast-paced, a lot of new information going on, a lot of new art, a lot of panels, and super enjoy watching it. And I think you should probably watch the full thing too. I hope you enjoyed this Gen Con 2023 Paizo Remaster panel summary. We got some new ancestries with the Tripkey, the frog people. We got a lot of new information, a lot of new art. We actually got to see actual pages and read some of the text that is going to be coming out in November, as well as advanced thing on Monster Core 2 and Player Core 2 as well. That are going to be coming out next year. But I do hope you like this summary. If you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.